This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
It just might be the greatest sports franchise in the history of sports. A place where legends are made, and there's always something to talk about. Get ready to immerse yourself in pinstripes. Start spreading the news, hosted by Paul Semendinger and E.J. Fagan, a couple of doctors with a prescription for Yankee fever. And now, here's Dr. Paul Semendinger and Dr. E.J. Fagan. Get ready to start spreading the news.
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today.
And now here they are, your hosts to start spreading the news, Dr. Sem and Dr. Fagan.
Welcome to the YouTube exclusive Start Spreading the News YouTube program, found on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, iTunes. Please subscribe and like the show. And as always, I'm Dr. Paul Semendinger, joined by my friend and co-host, Dr. E.J. Fagan of the Bronx Beat Podcast. E.J., how are you doing tonight?
Paul, I'm doing just about as great as that intro. I'm enjoying that new intro. Good job, guys.
Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, we are moving up and doing great things. Northeast Streaming Sports just continues to amaze and grow and do great things. Hey, speaking of great things, I have something great in my hands right now.
Yeah.
I am going to reveal it to the world for the very first time. Here it is, my new Yankees book, The Least Among Them. This is the story of the 29 Yankees whose only game in their entire career came, or the 29 players whose only game in their entire career came as a member of the Yankees. It's a beautiful book. We've got great photos. We've got statistics. We've got all sorts of great stuff in here, and it's coming out soon. Now, anybody in the New Jersey area, we are going to be having a free book launch celebration on the evening of October 10th in the perfect place in New Jersey for a book launch. We're going to be doing it at the Yogi Berra Museum. And in order to go, it's free. All you need to do is go to Start Spreading the News, my Yankees site. Up in the upper right-hand corner is a little brochure, a little image that talks about it. Click on that. It brings you to the place where you can go to Eventbrite and click and download your free tickets. We're going to have book talks. We're going to talk about the players. We'll have an author meet and greet. We'll sign things. You can see the museum. It should be a great, great, great event.
Paul will show you how he throws his curveball. Right? I mean, in person, Paul can show you how he throws his curveball.
I can show you. You know, EJ, after our show last Tuesday night, I actually pitched a 9-inning complete game. Gave up only 4 runs. I one of my best games ever. It was great. We lost 4-2, but 4 runs over 9 innings, real baseball. It was great.
You know, that's some high quality, like 1970s starting pitching right there. So I appreciate it. Good job.
And speaking of starting pitching, or at least a would-be starting pitcher, earlier today, the Yankees activated Luis Severino, and I think we're probably going to see him in the game tonight. And boy, oh boy, I want to talk to you about this. Here's my initial reaction. The Yankees said they might use him for up to 3 innings. Now, I'm glad Severino's back, but he has been very fragile. Hasn't really pitched since 2018, or at least a lot. There might not be a lot of pitching in his arm anyway this year because there's 12 games left, including tonight. But I don't know. The thing that scares me is in his first game back, you're going to push him up to 3 innings. I just don't know about that. But, EJ, what do you think about Luis Severino and his return to the Yankees?
Well, I mean, it's essentially a rehab start. So I'm not too concerned about the number of innings. I think it's interesting. So right now we're recording this. Chad Green is on the mound. He just gave up another run. So
it's at 4-3?
Yeah, but they brought him in with men on base. I suspect that Luis Severino will start the next inning. So they're going to start him in the 5th inning most likely, and then they'll give him 1 to 3 innings depending on how many pitches he throws. I'm assuming it's a pitch count that he's on. My league season's almost over. is basically over at this point, which means that, you don't have rehab starts. You got to do that rehab in the majors. I'm sure he's throwing bullpens. I'm not concerned about that. I think the Yankees need to know what they're going to get from Luis Severino going forward. And the only way to do that is to pitch him in the majors. And so, I think I hope they're trying to build him up to maybe a start by the end of the year, or at least a couple of multi-inning appearances, or just something to show that he's got it. Maybe he's a contributor down the stretch if the Yankees manage to kind of pull it together and sneak into a wild card spot. But I think more important than that is, we got a plan for next year. And Luis Severino could be an important part of next year's roster. He could be somebody that you would love to have, but you can't rely on. And if he comes back and he is dominant out of the bullpen in 3-inning stretches, maybe gets one, 4 or 5 inning start at the end of the year, and he's looking like old Luis Severino, well, then I think then you can have some interesting plans for next year. But if he comes back and his control's not good, he's giving up home runs, his velocity's down, then I think you have to start, considering, the long-term future of Severino as somebody who's not going to contribute.
Now, how many times do you think we have 12 games left, 11 after tonight? So, let's say he goes 3 innings tonight. He's going to have to take a couple of days off, right? Maybe he goes 3 innings once more, a couple of days off. I mean, we're probably only going to see him. Let's say he goes 4 innings if we give him a start. We're probably only going to see 10 innings. How much can you really gauge on how well he is back after 10 innings?
I think you're not going to know for certain that he's back, but I think you can know for certain that he's not back. That is, if he looks really bad, then you know that shoulder injury that he got a second opinion on is actually kind of bad. And, he's a big question mark for next season. But if he comes out of the bullpen throwing 100 miles an hour, like he was doing when he injured his shoulder while rehabbing over the summer, if he has good control, if he's just looking like a potential ace, I think that's good news. But I don't think you can count on him for 200 innings next year, regardless of how well he does in these couple of weeks. I also should say, there is a shot at a playoff run here. There's a world where the Yankees get hot going into the end of the season. They get hot. They beat the Rays and the Rays and the Red Sox and the Toronto Blue Jays. They have a really good last couple of weeks, and they just need some arms out of the bullpen. And one of those arms, I think, could be Luis Severino. So there is a potential contribution there. I think he's helped in terms of pressure by the fact that the Yankees don't need a starting pitcher right now. The Yankees starting pitching right now is fine, right? There's game to game. There's some games where they're not looking as great, but between Montgomery and Cortez and the way Kluber looked his last time out, and Garrett Cole even after a bad start, and Jameson Taillon's coming back, and Domingo Germán's coming back, they just don't need a guy to go out and give them 7 innings. They might want to maybe pair him with somebody like Cortez, who, for all as much as we all love Cortez, probably is not more than a 4 or 5 inning pitcher. Definitely not a third time through the order guy. And so if you can, give him 4 innings and then give Severino 2 to 3, that's a game. That's a pretty good ball game right there. And I think that's what's going to happen. So Green just got out of the inning. It's 4-3 Yankees. I suspect we're going to see Severino start the next inning.
And we'll get a good sense of where he is. I mean, we have all winter to talk about next year, of course, but unfortunately, his injury makes next year a big question mark because, what are the Yankees? They can't push him for more than 120 innings. Even if he's 100%, I can't see them pushing him for more than 120 innings. And now the Yankees really look at 2022 as the year he comes back, starts to build his arm strength up, and you hope that he's a major contributor in 2023, unless they decide that maybe. And I can't imagine them doing this, that since he has to have an innings limit, that some of that work next year comes out of the bullpen.
I think if this were 10 years ago, I think I'd be more of a concern in that, 10 years ago, you have a starting pitcher on your roster, you want him to pitch 180 innings. This year, Jameson Taillon pitched 140 innings and 27 starts this year, coming off of his second Tommy John surgery in a very similar situation to Luis Severino. And so if Severino's shoulder is healthy, I think that's what you could expect next year, right? So he pitches a lot, probably late in the year. He has some sort of minor diffuse injury that an MRI couldn't detect as anybody really asked for proof. and he takes 2 weeks off and he comes back for the playoffs. Right? I suspect that is your best case scenario for Severino next year, and I'll take it. Right? Like the Yankees are going to have a really interesting starting pitching situation over the offseason where they have more than 5 starting pitchers under contract for next year, or at least under team control for next year. And I think that's the way to go. I think the way to go is to say, Severino is one of 7 or 8 guys that they're counting on for next year. And again, if he's throwing 100 miles an hour, then we know at least his talent is back. Whether or not his health will hold up, that's a whole other question. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. But at this point, I don't think it's that big of a deal.
All right, I see 5 pitchers for next year. I see a rotation of Cole, Taillon, Cortez, Montgomery, and Severino.
Keel.
Oh, all right. And you want to put Clark Schmidt in there as well?
You got Clark Schmidt, you got Luis Gil, you got Luis Medina. I actually wouldn't be shocked if they re-signed Corey Kluber.
I wouldn't either.
At this point,
I would do it if I don't know if I'd go 10 million again.
Yeah, and I don't think they'd have to. But there's other players out there that you could sign that are comparable right now. We talked in the show how I'd love to go ahead and get a Max Scherzer, somebody like that to put on top of all that. But my point is that, we're going to be talking a lot about what to do about this Yankees team in the offseason. We're going to discuss some of those topics tonight. The starting pitching is not one that I am particularly worried about. The Yankees had strong starting pitching for most of this year. It felt a little frustrating at times, but I think it felt a little frustrating at times because starting pitching in general in the league is frustrating right now. But in terms of, compared to their competitors, the Yankee starting pitching has been really good this year. And that's about as good as you can ask for a team. And so I just don't think this is, I think Luis Severino is a nice 6 or 7 starter who, if you get lucky, if you cross your fingers, if he is Luis Severino, then all of a sudden you're talking about having an elite number 2 starter behind Garrett Cole. And I think that's what you have to hope for. And I think that's what they have to see if they have right now on the roster. And I don't think they have any choice right now but to throw him for a couple of inning stints. They could try to give him some simulated games and build him up to 5 or 6 innings and give him a starter to the end of the season. But they've run out of time, frankly.
Well, they have run out of time.
Yeah,
but I'm just wondering, we have seen the Yankees botch a lot of injuries over the years. And boy, oh boy, here's a guy who at his best, as you say, can be an ace. Even next year, he could be a number 2. But what I liked what you said was what I would say. Next year, I would count on him as my 5th starter. I would just tell him, you're going to pitch every 5th day, but you're going to be the last guy. There's no pressure. We're going to give you weeks off at a time or skip a start every now and again, especially if you're 5th starter. You're going to miss some starts, especially early in the season. And hopefully you build him up so by the end of the year, he's strong. And then he can, peak heading into the playoffs and he stays under that 140 inning limit that we talked about. I think the Yankees, I will agree with you, have the makings of some nice pitchers for next year. Cole should be very good. I would think Taillon's going to have a better year. I think Montgomery proves that he's a solid 3-4 type of guy. I think we've probably seen the best of Nestor Cortez, but then on the other hand, I think Luis Gil and Schmidt and maybe even Debbie Garcia or one of those guys can help fill the void. And if the Yankees do, and if they can go out and spend and bring themselves maybe Corey Kluber back or get a big time pitcher somewhere, I think the starting staff should be competitive. So,
it'll be an off-season topic for us. What I really like about a lot of those names players you mentioned, Gil, Clark Schmidt, Nestor Cortez, is they're kind of guys that you could put in the bullpen in a long relief role, and they're not going to complain that much. The Yankees probably couldn't turn Jameson Taillon into a relief pitcher because they're worried about his innings cap or because he's not too effective that month. Or because they want to try out Luis Severino first and have a Nestor Cortez as their backup plan. But I'm pretty confident that Nestor Cortez will take whatever job is given to him with a smile and it not be a problem next year. And I think that's what they'll do. I think they'll go into the year next year with a guy like Nestor Cortez as their sixth starter, not in the rotation, coming out of the bullpen, and then someone will get injured because somebody always gets injured, and he'll be the guy you bring out, or you have Clark Schmidt at AAA, or you have Luis Gil at AAA, or something along those lines. And I think that kind of flexible roster space is something the Yankees should strive for. And in other positions, they have in other parts of the roster, they have not been able to kind of achieve that. And I think Luis Severino is a key part of that. There's no world where they're comfortable with Luis Severino being healthy and 100% ready to go heading into spring training. There is a world where they're kind of okay with him, right? They're saying, he looked pretty good at the end of the season. He's probably got some innings in him. And
let's hope it is. And let's hope they don't push him, and let's hope they don't exacerbate an injury, because, they're fighting for it right now. But let's be honest, and this was going to be our opening topic anyway. The Yankees had that 13-game winning streak, not counting tonight. Since then, they've gone 6-15. Heading into tonight, they're 2 games back with 11 to play, or if you want to count tonight, 12 to play. 2 games back in the loss column. And, they're looking like an 89 to 90 win team if you extrapolate their wins out over 162 games. It's the second year in a row. Last year's team would have been an 89 win team. Disappointing. And of course, any team can get hot. And this is what the playoffs are. And this is why baseball does it, because it becomes very exciting. Yankees could get hot. They could win a couple big games next week or this week, and all of a sudden they're back in the wild card. You could win a wild card and run off a 13-game winning streak and win the World Series. And all of a sudden, sometimes the narrative is written after the fact, right? Like, oh, what a great job they did. They held it together during a difficult period, and now they're world champions. What brilliant jobs they all did. And boy, we've been taught and we've learned not to trust small sample sizes. So if the Yankees do somehow win the World Series, as unlikely as that possibly could be, but if they do we trust that small sample size? And does that give us the idea to keep moving forward in this direction?
If they win the World Series, I'm not complaining about anything, right? So, sure. I don't think that's really the hypothetical you're really asking about, though, right? I mean, you're asking about if they have a good couple of weeks and they sneak into the playoffs and they look okay in the playoffs and whatever, they put up a fight against whatever teams they're put up against. I get a little concerned kind of about that. The way that doesn't create change. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom in order to change yourself. And the Yankees just don't hit rock bottom. Like, they're not bad enough. They're not the Mets. They're not the Red Sox the year after they won in 2013, right? So the year after they won the World Series, the Red Sox were a last place team. And the Yankees just don't do that. They're still going to be an 89-ish win team this season. They're still better than one of the other teams we're going to talk about that are in the playoffs. Excuse me. This season, and any team that makes the playoffs is potentially dangerous in the playoffs, which are a crapshoot. The more I think about this team, the core of this team, I think the underlying issue that we're not talking about is that this is a team that was built to win in 2018, 2019, and 2020 to some extent. That is Gary Sanchez, Aaron Judge, DJ LeMahieu, these guys were in their prime and they were productive and they were great. And those seasons got derailed because of injuries. They were just absolutely devastated by injuries. It was the next man up season. And then the 2020 season, which was almost as bad as the next man up season. And, they had a championship caliber team assembled during that time, and they just got killed by injuries. And what we're looking at now is a shadow of that team.
I'll challenge that, though. I don't know if it was just all injuries. I think there's question over the manager, but we'll leave that as it is. Go on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what we're seeing now is a shadow of that team. I think about the Cubs team that the Cubs just broke up, where they traded away Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo, and they have the tail end of Wilson Contreras being an all-star player, and Yu Darvish was traded away, and Craig Kimbrell, and all of these players who They won the World Series, and then they were good players. And so into their decline phases, off their peak, they were still capable of putting together a first place winning team. This was a first place team in 2020. And I think the Yankees are in that spot right now, where they have that core of players that was set up to win a World Series a couple of years ago. And now they're still good. They're just not great. And you're seeing kind of that core fade away, right? You're seeing the last vestige of Brett Gardner's career. You're seeing what players like, Gio Urshela look like when they kind of hit their late 20s. You're seeing the best bullpen in baseball finally all get old all at the same time. And, it hurts to realize that, like, that was our shot. That was this core team shot. And they just got injured, right? There was just nothing you could really do about that. And I think we went in with expectations this year that this team, despite the aging on the team, would be a continuation of that championship caliber team. And we hoped that players who were on the wrong side of the aging curve would continue to continue to stay as elite players. And the reality is that they aren't, right? That DJ LeMahieu is not the elite player he was for the last 3 seasons. Somebody like a Aroldis Chapman or a Chad Green or a Zach Britton are finally showing their mid to late 30s, character. That someone like a Gary Sanchez, who has gone through periods of being an elite hitter, is no longer an elite hitter, right? Is no longer somebody who would be, the second or third best hitting catcher in baseball. You can kind of go down the list. And I think the problem here is that a lot of these players are like 29, 30, 31. That's old in baseball terms.
And we're going to talk about Gary in a minute.
The one player who I think upsets this problem is Gleyber Torres. So you hope that as those players age, that Gleyber Torres would mature into the elite shortstop that he looked like in 2018 and 2019. And the reality is that did not occur. The opposite occurred. He got much worse. He became much worse on defense. He became a much, much worse hitter. And, coupled with all those age-related declines, the fact that their core young players still in the prime of his career was worse than any of those old guys, I think is really what upset this season. I think we're going to look back on this year and we're going to talk a lot about the bullpen, because bullpens blow close games when they're not very good. But the problem is that too many of those games were close. They were too close because this team can't score runs, because its offense all got old at the exact same time. Maybe it was the juice ball, maybe it was something else, but they all got old at the exact same time. And so they're the third worst offense in baseball, which makes all of those holes in the bullpen look a lot worse. It tires out the good pitchers. And it means that even when you get a good performance out of your starting pitcher, you often still lose that game.
I agree entirely. And you know what? 2 things. As I said, I said at the time, I will say it again. The Yankees were on the precipice, as you just talked about in 2018. They were there. They were on the precipice, and they made a decision. And I think it's a decision they're going to regret forever. And I think sometimes people misunderstand. Aaron Boone may turn out to be a great manager. Aaron Boone may turn out to be a fine manager. Aaron Boone may win a couple of World Series. All of those things can happen. But it seemed like the greatest leap of faith to take a team on the precipice and to turn it over to a guy who had never managed, not an inning. The thing I mentioned at the time was I had coached more innings as a little league coach than Aaron Boone had ever. He didn't coach. He never even sat in a dugout in a leadership role in the minor leagues, in the major leagues, anywhere. And they took this team that was ready to fulfill its promise, and they said, we're going to trust a true novice. And boy, that was a risk, a big leap of faith. And, in the end, it doesn't look like it worked. The Yankees, as we talked about, have crumbled down the stretch. And my worry is if they do get hot, as we alluded to a little bit a while ago, that they get hot and all of a sudden it obscures the fact that probably big change, not even probably, I think absolutely changes need to be made. The way it's working isn't working. And to compound what you also mentioned about Gleyber Torres, the Yankees had two other players who were supposed to be part of the youth that was going to be the youth that was infused into this club. And that was Clint Frazier and Miguel Andujar. And, both of them showed signs of promise. Injuries definitely got in their way. But, if you had those three guys playing at where everybody hoped they would be playing, then it would look a little differently, look a lot differently. You'd have the older guys, but you'd have these younger guys also who are helping to keep the team young, fresh, and exciting and youthful, and to be able to play with a different level of athleticism than what we see right now, which is, as you said, a lot of aging guys who are station to station, long ball threats who don't really do much besides hit long balls, walk, and strike out.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk more about Aaron Boone kind of as the offseason comes. I'm sure we'll get news, pretty soon after the season's over about what will happen to him. But I want to look at the 2019 Yankees, and just to give you an example of where I think they screwed up. The 2019 Yankees had a starting pitching staff that was actually pretty healthy throughout the year. This is a staff with Masahiro Tanaka as kind of the best the pitcher on the staff, even though the best pitcher was supposed to be James Paxton, Domingo Germán, CC Sabathia, J. Happ. They made almost every start. There was a decent number of starts made by Chad Green as an opener back when teams were doing that a little bit more. But that was a successful starting pitching in terms of health. But they gave up a lot of runs. Tanaka had an ERA of 4.45, J. Happ 4.49. Paxton was okay at 3.82. Sabathia had a 5 ERA. The problem with that rotation is that the players weren't very good. Part of that is because Luis Severino gets injured, and Luis Severino was supposed to be essentially the number 2 or even the ace of that staff. Jordan Montgomery gets injured, so Jordan Montgomery doesn't get to be a big part of that staff. And the Yankees didn't go out and get Patrick Corbin. They decided to take the cheap player in J. Happ over the really good player in Patrick Corbin, and Patrick Corbin was an important part of why the Nationals were really good that season. We've talked about players like Justin Verlander and Zach Greinke, who the Yankees could have gone out and gotten. And I don't know, I don't know who you blame for that other than the front office and the ownership. This is a team that was ready to go, right? This was a team that was ready to win. In fact, they had all the injuries on the hitting side. This is a team that lost Giancarlo Stanton for most of that season. As you mentioned, Clint Frazier was not very good for most of that season. And they were able to still be really good because Luke Voigt and Gio Urshela came up. Mike Tauchman had a surprisingly good season. It was a team that should not have been as good as it was. And they still couldn't win because they didn't have the personnel in the field. I don't think that's Aaron Boone's fault, right? Aaron Boone isn't going to make J. Happ good. J. Happ wasn't supposed to be good. He was old. He was an old player who was their budget pick, and the budget performed. I think what they didn't do is do what the Astros did, which was realize that their window is open, that they had a core of really good World Series caliber hitters, and they needed to supplement it with a pitching staff. And the Astros went out and got Charlie Morton, Zach Greinke, and Justin Verlander. They are now paying for that decision in the sense that Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander's contract is still on the books, right? They're still paying for it, and that hurts. And they probably could have repurposed that money in a different season, but they went for it. They said, okay, we're gonna put our chips in, and they did, and it was successful. They won the World Series as a result. The Red Sox went out and traded for Chris Sale in a similar situation. The Dodgers this year went out and traded for Max Scherzer. We can go through this list of examples, even ones that didn't work, right? The Padres trade for Yu Darvish, which has not worked out particularly great this season. The Yankees have never made that decisive move. They have made some trade deadline-ish moves, right? They acquired Edwin Encarnacion in 2019. They acquired Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo this year, but they're still budget moves. They're still acquiring good, maybe damaged, but potentially good type players, and not going out and getting the best players they could. And that's a recipe for being a good but not great team, which is how I think we can fairly describe this Yankees team this year.
It's funny. It's funny. I have to put this up here. I don't know if we can see it. What did I write?
Good to great. There we go, right?
Good is the enemy of great. You and I are thinking on the same lines here.
Well, the part of the problem is that I think the mission that the Yankees organization has given itself over a long period of time is that they need to be a World Series contender every single year. And the downside of that is that you can't put all your chips in for any one season. Because if you do that, that you're going to be paying for that decision a couple of seasons down the line. So if you overcommit one season, then eventually Justin Verlander has Tommy John surgery and you're paying him $25 million to do nothing that season. Or 32, or whatever Justin Verlander is being paid. Similarly with a player like, for example, Mookie Betts. The Dodgers gave Mookie Betts $400 million, which is frankly not looking like a great long-term contract right now. It does not look like a contract the Dodgers are going to be happy to be paying in 8 years. But in the meantime, he won them a World Series, and he's likely to continue to help them win World Series as they go. And I think the key strategic error was the Yankees all of a sudden acquired a young core of players that could form the core of a World Series team. Aaron Judge, Gary Sanchez, etc. come up and they look really, really good. And they did not seize that opportunity and supplement them with players that ended up being capable of doing that. I will also say that the Giancarlo Stanton trade ended up really sabotaging them there because of whatever budget they had. Maybe they should have a budget higher than their current budget, but whatever budget that they have, a good chunk of that is taken up by Giancarlo Stanton. And even this season, when he has been healthy all season, Giancarlo Stanton has been a good but not great player. He has been a player that occasionally hits amazing, fun to watch home runs, and I love watching Giancarlo Stanton hit a home run that only he could swing at, right? No one else could have that swing and hit a home run. But if you look at his season numbers, they're just not that good. He's slugging .500. He's got an on base of about .360. As a DH, that's fine, but it's a 3-win player, not a standout player, a player that's not all that different from those 2 great seasons of Gio Urshela, except Gio Urshela could also play a really good third base. And that also, it's hurt their roster moves. They have not been able to play Luke Voit because Giancarlo Stanton, while he's hot, you got to play him. And they've had Brett Gardner get hot over the last 2 months, play a pretty good center field. So your best possible team has your best hitter on the bench, or your second or third best hitter in Luke Voit on the bench. That's a problem. And I think that trade, it turns out, will end up being one of those just really disastrous contracts. The National Hockey League has a rule where they have a firm salary cap, and teams are allowed to buy out bad contracts. And lots of really big teams, like, for example, the New York Rangers, buy out contracts all the time. They make a signing, that signing doesn't work out, and so they pay the player to go away, and that player comes off their salary caps. And I hope that's something that Major League Baseball and the Players Union adopt during this round of the collective bargaining agreements, because the Yankees need to buy out some of these contracts. It would be great for them to get out from underneath the DJ LeMahieu contract in a year or two, unfortunately. It'd be great to get out from underneath that Giancarlo Stanton contract eventually. If that's not allowed, then the Yankees are just going to have some zombie contracts eating up a big piece of their payroll going forward, and they're not going to be able to do something like sign Aaron Judge to a big contract, which I would love to see if they had the space. I don't think they have the space right now, so it's going to be kind of difficult for them to do that.
I was looking at an article on Forbes that came out, I believe it was in March of 2021. And we know that the Yankees cut salary this year, cut payroll. And but it said that the Yankees saw an increase of 5% in their overall value, the overall net worth of the team. The Yankees did not reinvest that 5% back in the team. And I do think this gets to the core of a lot of what Yankee fans are very discouraged about. Right or wrong, fairly or not, Yankee fans have been brought up since the 70s. It's been the Yankee model that we are all in, and cost doesn't matter. That was the Steinbrenner issue. Now, again, did they make mistakes in the 80s, or at least the late 80s and into the early 90s? Of course they did. Did George Steinbrenner learn from those mistakes? I think he did, and he kept the good young core, and
he was forcibly removed from the clubhouse.
Well, correct, but no, I'm saying once he came back, he didn't get rid of Derek Jeter and Bernie Williams and Andy Pettitte and Mariano Rivera and all those guys once he came back. But the Yankees are brought up with this idea that we're all in. And I think the problem has been that since 2009, when they did go all in and they said, we're going to win the World Series and we're going to bring in CC Sabathia and AJ Burnett and Mark Teixeira, we're going to do everything we can to put the best possible team out there. Since then, it's sort of been hedging up the bets. And I agree. When the Yankees got Giancarlo Stanton, I was thrilled. How could you not be thrilled?
59 home runs the season before.
Correct. But I don't, and the thing is, I don't think anybody realized that when they got Giancarlo Stanton, that the Yankees were going to say, well, that's a certain percentage of our payroll. You felt, or I felt, I think the common fan probably felt like, oh, look, the Yankees are back to going for it. They're not going to let salaries stand in their way. They're going to put together the best possible team they can, and they're going to go all out to win this thing. Instead, they signed him. Later on, they signed Garrett Cole. Great signings in theory, because you want to bring the best players in. But if you're then going to go halfway at the rest of the roster and at the trade deadline, and when a Verlander becomes available, you don't go after him. There's no point, right? It's this idea of we're going to be good, but we don't have to be great anymore. We're going to put a good enough team out there to keep people interested. But we know, and we've said this for years, you can see that they're not 100% in. You can see the weaknesses as the season starts. And you say, oh, well, let's look at it with rose-colored glasses. If Stanton can be Stanton and hit 45 home runs if he's healthy, well, why can't he? And then maybe Judge hits 40 home runs. Why can't he? You're going to have 85 home runs between the two of those guys. And why can't Sanchez hit another 30 home runs? And that's what you do in the beginning of the season. And the Yankees get you excited, and then the reality comes that they're really not those players anymore. I mean, I think Aaron Judge can be, but my worry with Judge, as we've talked about, is if they sign him, it becomes almost like akin to the Rangers signing A-Rod. Like, we're going to invest all this money in Aaron Judge, but if we don't put a great team around him, what's the point?
Yeah, I think look, the Yankees' revenue has grown tremendously since the mid-2000s, and their payroll is the same. In fact, inflation has kicked in since the 2000s, and their payroll is the same. This is a team that is a cash cow for the Steinbrenners, and the Steinbrenners are very happy to use the luxury tax as a soft cap. They keep saying we're willing to go above the cap for the right player, but there have been situations where the right player was available, right? Max Scherzer was available this season. The Yankees clearly gave up extra prospects in order for the teams that they traded for players from the trade deadline to take some of that salary.
That is free. I think the players were free, right?
Right. Yeah. All Anthony Rizzo's salary is being paid by the Cubs, and the Yankees threw in some extra prospects to make that happen. I hope that this is a wake-up call in some cases, some ways for the Steinbrenners. Now, the reality is that the Steinbrenners get their yes money no matter what, right? They get the money from your cable contracts and all that, no matter what happens to this team. And the Yankees are selling tickets still, no matter what, right? They're still able to sell those tickets. I think the least we can hope for is the collective bargaining agreement increasing the amount, the luxury tax this offseason. There's been some, apparently the Major League Baseball offered a higher minimum and actually lowering the luxury tax for next season. The players are going to say no to that. But I think it's reasonable to expect this cap to go up considerably, which means the Yankees could probably add another $20 to $30 million player to this roster, which would be nice. But they should be willing to go above that number. Now, let me say this, though. I'm wondering now if the Yankees are in a situation where now they shouldn't. So right now, if you went out and you signed Corey Seager to a $300 million contract, you have a situation where Corey Seager will be the same age as all of the other guys in this roster who are aging up. It might be the case that the Yankees have to go the traditional rebuilding route of trading guys who are still good, like the Cubs did this year, and then waiting for those really impressive young players to come out of the farm system. I think they will do what the Cubs did last year, which is go for one last run next season with the old crowd. And if by the trade deadline it's not working out, then you start talking about trading them. That seems likely to me, helped by the fact that you're still got Giancarlo Stanton on this roster for a long time. You still got Garrett Cole and DJ LeMahieu on this roster for a long time. So they're still going to be there, right? So, there's not a ton of utility in throwing a season away. And frankly, I wouldn't mind seeing this team try and make one more run. I think that could be fun if they're able to succeed at doing it, and you could probably supplement them with some other kinds of players. But it reminds me of the excitement that I felt that week that the Yankees DFA'd Alex Rodriguez, benched essentially Mark Teixeira, and called up Gary Sanchez and Tyler Austin. Aaron Judge and Tyler Austin. Gary Sanchez had been on the roster for a couple of weeks at that point.
They both homered that first game.
And they both homered back-to-back. That was fun, right? That was baseball I really enjoyed. And I really enjoyed watching those players play for a while. And I still do enjoy watching Aaron Judge, for instance, play. I think, that like moment of baseball recreation might have to come again.
And what happened with Robbie Cano too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that Cano was, we talk about, you mentioned, hey, the Yankees went out.
They both came up that same year.
Well, you said, hey, the Yankees went out and they got Mark Teixeira, CC Sabathia, and AJ Burnett, and they won the World Series. AJ Burnett was not good that year, right? So in reality, they went out and they got two players. Teixeira, who was pretty good, right? He was an improvement over what the Yankees had at first base.
I think he was really good that year.
But I mean, that was not the best contract ever in the world.
No. But he was great in 2009. I think he was the runner-up for the MVP.
He was really good. CC Sabathia was the core of that acquisition.
Absolutely.
He was the Garrett Cole of that. I think the fact that Robinson Cano and Brett Gardner and a bunch of other players on that roster were there, and frankly, the tail end and also the core four were still there and were still really good. That's why that team was impressive and was able to win the World Series, right? You still got a 300 batting average out of your shortstop that year. And I think I don't know if there's a version of that happening to this Yankees team if Oswaldo Peraza and Anthony Volpe and Austin Wells and Everson Pereira and all these players who are going to be a lot of fun to watch aren't the core of the next Yankee team, with Aaron Judge and Garrett Cole and all those, and some of those guys playing kind of the old veteran role that Jeter and Posada and Pettit and Mariano played on those teams. I think that's where we're heading. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I just want that when that happens, for the Yankees to go big and to take that opportunity and put together one of the best teams in baseball and go win. And then maybe that means that's going to be followed by a couple of years of Garrett Cole's decline years, and Max Scherzer, who they go out and get him, his decline years and whatever, right? Like that's also a possibility. But I think, to me, that's where we're heading, regardless of what happens this season. I'm still watching the Yankee games. I still root for the Yankees to win whenever they're on the field, right? I think I still enjoy watching a close game where the Yankees are going to win, even if they're very stressful, more stressful than normal these days.
Well, they're winning right now, 4-3.
They're winning right now, and if they make the playoffs, I'm going to be rooting for them to win. But regardless of what happens in the playoffs, I am rooting for changes, and I think the coaching staff is the place to target right now. In part because you can do it, right? You can fire coaches and not pay a luxury tax penalty. And unfortunately, that's an important consideration for the Yankees. And so, I wouldn't be shocked to see Mike Harkey, bullpen coach, end up going soon. I wouldn't be shocked to see Matt Blake, pitching coach. I wouldn't be shocked to see Marcus Thames, Aaron Boone. I think all of these guys are, at the very least, don't appear to be standout coaches. The Yankees will be able to hire a good coach at some point this offseason. There will be people who want to coach on the Yankees regardless of the roster, because it's the Yankees.
Exactly.
And so I think that's something that you'll consider. You'll have to consider after the season. And the tougher discussion which we'll have will be, regardless again of how this team does in the playoffs and over these last couple of weeks, it's going to be, what do you do with a bunch of guys who are free agents after one more season, who are getting expensive, who are getting old, and are merely good players? And, the answer might be you trade them for prospects. I don't know.
Well, I think that's going to be something to really talk about. Now, one of the topics we were going to dive deep into.
Let's do it.
Well, you want to do it still?
Let's do it.
Are we saving for next week? Is Gary Sanchez?
Today's the day to talk about Gary Sanchez.
You think so?
He's
Gary Sanchez. a lot of people love looking at his peripheral numbers and say he's an elite hitter and he this, that, and a rate stat when he connecting rate and all this kind of stuff. Gary Sanchez, since 2018, has a 201 batting average, a 301 on base percentage, and a 446 slugging percentage. That's just not good. And he's not a good defensive catcher. If he was Joel Skinner back in the 80s or Joe Girardi, when the Yankees had Joe Girardi, if he put up numbers like that, you would have said that's bad. But at least you would have known that the guy behind the plate's calling a good game, and he's in every game. I mean, we saw Gary Sanchez drop a pop-up the other day that very rare when you see a catcher miss a ball like that. We saw him 2 weeks ago miss a tag at home plate, which is something I'd never seen. I not even in Little League or in the men's leagues I still play in. I mean, people make the tag. How do you get deked on things like that? And now, as you say, he's going to be 29 years old. And, he had his opportunity. He's been a Yankee. Gary Sanchez has been a Yankee for a long, long time. He's been around since 2015. He's played 527 games as a Yankee. He's hitting 210 this year. He hit 147 last year, 232 the year before, 186 the year before. I mean, at what point do you say it's not going to happen, Gary? We gave you a shot. You gave it your best. God bless you. You're just not. He is not, in my opinion, the catcher who's going to be the catcher who's going to be a catcher on a championship ball club. It's time to move on. But then the question is, and this is what I really want to know. Number one, I want to see if you agree with me on that. But number two is, if not Gary, who?
Yeah. So Yankees Rudy in the comments says it's time to move on. I think that's probably right. Gary Sanchez is going to be very expensive this season. He's going to arbitration for the last time. He's going to hit probably 24-ish home runs, 25 maybe this season. They're going to pay him. And what that means is, there's probably not room on this roster for a $18 million catcher who I think is merely okay. Right? I think that's the way if you adjust your expectations on Gary Sanchez, I think he's okay. He has been a better hitter than the average catcher by quite a lot over that time period. He says since 2018, he's a 200 hitter. The average catcher is a 200 hitter during that time. And Gary Sanchez has some power there. He's not a good defensive catcher. He's not an awful defensive catcher. I've seen worse defensive catchers, Jorge Posada, for much of his career, for instance. But if he's not hitting great, I think he gets non-tendered, frankly. I think that's probably where we're heading right now, because he's going to be too expensive and no team's going to want to trade for him at the price that he's going to command. Who replaces him? I'll tell you right now, there's no one in the system. It's not going to be Kyle Higashioka. It's not going to be.
He's not young. I mean, everybody thinks he's a young guy.
Well, if you look at the list,
I think he's older than Gary Sanchez.
I think he is too. I mean, he's been around for a very long time, and frankly, he's just not that good, right? Like Kyle Higashioka is an okay but not great backup catcher. But as a starting catcher, he would be a disaster. He would be one of the worst.
He's going to be 32 next year.
And he's going to be he would be one of the worst starting catchers in the league. In fact, he's one of the, he's an okay backup catcher. The Yankees could do better than him at backup catcher. Who is that other player? I don't know. Because if you look at the list of free agents, there's not a lot of catching free agents out there right now. There's no JT Realmuto coming up on the list. If you look at all the best catchers right now, a lot of guys who aren't going to be free agents anytime soon. They're not going to be on the trade market most likely. They could end up going with essentially an okay set of pair of veterans, right? You hire Kurt Suzuki and someone else who's kind of seen their best days, and you end up as your number 9 hitter who's not all that good. And I think they're going to miss Gary Sanchez's 22 home runs when that happens. They may not miss his defense. They might be a better team because of it. They might be able to reallocate that money more efficiently to other players. And in that case, fine. Give me Marcus Semien at shortstop. If the choice is between DFA and Gary Sanchez and having a not so great catcher and getting a really good shortstop, maybe I'll take the shortstop, right? We can have that discussion. I think it's really just a matter of cost. If you reallocate your expectations, you go, okay, Gary Sanchez, he's the 20th best catcher in the league, which is what he's been this season. That's fine, right? That's
paying him to be the 20th.
Exactly, right? Like that to me is why I think he gets non-tendered. I also just think that the guy doesn't seem to be having fun out there on this team. I think it's okay for him to move on. I think Yankees really saying it's time to move on. That's the right way to say it, right? Thank you for your service. I'll remember the big home runs. There was a point in time when you were an elite hitter. There were stretches when Gary Sanchez was an elite hitter, but he's 29. I don't think anybody at any point in time thought that big Gary Sanchez was going to have, going to be a catcher into his 30s. And it's clear that Gary Sanchez is not getting a long-term contract with his team. He is not going to be the first baseman for 5 years after he moved off from behind the plate. He's just going to have a fairly short career, and we should be okay with that.
Right. And I liked what you said. And we talk about this, you don't attack the human, the human being. We're talking about a baseball player and his baseball performance and his baseball performance. Unfortunately, sometimes when you have really high expectations and the sky was the limit for him, and just like before him, Jesus Montero, right? Boy, I was at a ball game. One of his very first games, he hit 2 home runs, right? And he was going to be the greatest. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. The Yankees have given Gary Sanchez every possible opportunity, and it just hasn't worked out. He hasn't become that elite player everybody felt he was going to be. And his defense, I think, has been I know there's peripheral stats and things that say it's mediocre, but the lack of attention or whatever it is that makes those certain plays become so apparent. The missed tag, the wild pitches in big spots, et cetera. I think those become so distracting that there is no statistic for that, but that they weigh heavier on the way you look at a team or the way you look at a player or the impact that has on the team. So if I'm the pitcher and I know I'm worried about Gary Sanchez missing balls and he blocks 4 and then he misses the 5th one, even though his numbers are going to look pretty good because he did block 4, he misses. I maybe as a pitcher, I get afraid to throw that next really good curveball or slider because of the reputation he has. And so maybe it is time for the Yankees to sort of do what they did when Joe Torre came aboard. And they had a great hitting catcher at the time, a guy everybody loved, who was Mr. Grand Slam and clutch when the bases were loaded, was Mike Stanley. And when the Yankees got rid of him, everybody was like, oh, my goodness. He was so great for a period of time. But the Yankees said the thing the team needs, especially if the strength next year is going to be starting pitching, is a top-notch defensive catcher. And that's what Joe Girardi was. And he helped lead that team.
Well, Girardi can hit too, right?
He was a 270 hitter, but no power.
I mean,
right?
I just think of these in terms of just raw numbers, right? So Gary Sanchez, he's having, again, an okay season, right? This is a guy, he's still going to hit 22 home runs this season. He's still batting, better than he has in some seasons, right? So, he's not hitting 150. So he's been a 1.6 win player this season, according to WAR. If you think that maybe his defense wasn't as good as WAR thinks it was, he thinks it's about average. WAR thinks it's about average. That's fine. That's fine, right? So maybe he's a little bit worse than that. That means you're not losing that much by going out and getting a merely serviceable catcher. So if you go out and you end up with, I'm just looking at some names here. You look at Elias Diaz, who is the catcher for the Colorado Rockies this season. Really good defensive player, not a great hitter, though not an absolutely awful hitter. He's a 1-win player. Right. So worst case scenario, you save a bunch of money and you get a player that's not that much different than Gary Sanchez. And maybe the defensive stuff matters, right? Maybe there's once you replace Gary Sanchez with a pretty good defensive catcher, you end up with a pretty good player. I think the way they need to solve this problem is with 2 catchers. Right. I don't think they're going to find a starting catcher to play, 450 plate appearances that's any good. Right. There's not that those players are not available right now. But if you can find 2 catchers, both of whom are pretty solid on defense, one maybe could be a 1A, one could be a 1B.
Maybe one's a lefty. Wouldn't that be something?
And one of them is an improvement on Kyle Higashioka, who again is not very good. I think you can basically get by with a solid defensive tandem. I would love if they could find someone similar to when they found Russell Martin. I thought Russell Martin was the great stopgap catcher at the time. He's a little bit older. They knew he didn't have a long-term future with the Yankees, but he was a fine enough hitter, a really good defensive player, and was one of the reasons why that pitching staff was pretty good for a couple of years. And I think that's going to happen. I really think Gary Sanchez is non-tendered after the season. I think that's very likely. And I think he also could go and, he could sign with some team and hit 30 home runs for them, and we might miss him. But I don't think that's very likely. I just think he's getting old and he's past his prime, and it's no longer worth it.
Again, if Gary Sanchez goes and he plays for the Milwaukee Brewers and he hits 30 home runs, God bless him. Like, good. I don't wish the man ill. I think his time in the Bronx is up, and I think it's time that the Yankees need to go in another direction. And I would like to see the Yankees pitchers throwing to like a tandem or a single guy who's going to be a really good defensive catcher and help lead the staff and get them through next season, right? So if Gary goes off, I part of me always feels like the Yankees, Brian Cashman's been so good at doing such good trades and finding guys like Aaron Hicks, who was good for a period, and Didi Gregorius and Gio Urshela out of nowhere, Luke Voigt and Aaron Small and Sean Chacon. I mean, we go on and on forever with these guys that he found out of nowhere, and they ended up having some pretty good years with the Yankees. That I don't, you almost feel like he's afraid to have a former Yankee come back and bite them. And so they hang on to these guys until it's almost guaranteed that that's not going to happen. And I'd rather see Gary go and do well than keep him around and hope he does well.
I think I'm a little more charitable with Sanchez. If you look at his first 4 seasons, you look at 2016 when he came in and he had that amazing kind of start to his career through 2019. He was the best hitting catcher in baseball.
Oh, he was great.
And I think they and he was 26 years old at the end of that. And he was a big guy who was never super athletic behind the plate. And I think he just got bad. Like, I think he just declined. And the problem with baseball's arbitration system, and it's good that the players get paid, is that, you're paying for his past years. They're going to have to, but right now he's a $6 million player. He's probably worth $6 million this year. I'm probably pretty happy with that contract. Next year, he's a $12 million player or a $13 million player. And at that point, you're sacrificing a relief pitcher for him, or you're sacrificing the ability to re-sign, someone like an Anthony Rizzo or something like that next year. And I just don't think it's worth it anymore. Like, we got spoiled by Jorge Posada being a really good catcher for so long, rather a really good hitter who could, in theory, catch for so long. And that's unusual. Like, most players like Gary Sanchez, who are kind of big, heavy, not particularly athletic catchers who can hit, don't have long careers. I think they're going to regret not signing Yasmani Grandal when he was a free agent. Yasmani Grandal is probably the best catcher in baseball still today. They might regret not signing JT Realmuto, though honestly that contract looks like it's going to be kind of bad once he gets a little bit older. But that to me, if I'm Brian Cashman, I'm looking for trades. If I'm saying like, I gotta advance scout somebody, it's a catcher. Like, that is the long-term position that they need to handle, right? Next year, 1 year, you get a couple of old guys who are serviceable players. Like, that's a fine stopgap, but there is no help coming through the Yankee system right now at catcher. The best catcher they have in the system right now is a guy named Austin Wells. Austin Wells was a first-round pick 2 years ago, and he was drafted as a catcher, although he wasn't playing catcher at the time. They have now had him catch, and they've had him and another guy named Josh Bro, both kind of in this catcher DH role in the minors. Neither are good catchers right now. Austin Wells might evolve into a good catcher, but similar to someone like Jesus Montero or Gary Sanchez, they're playing bat first and glove second. We're running out of time, but you have an article up on Start Spreading the News right now about robo-umps. And I actually wonder if robo-umps change this calculus at some point soon where you're okay with the bat first catcher because you don't have to have them frame pitches.
That's correct. That's a great point.
But I think but that's not now. That's not the reality right now, and I don't think that's going to be the reality next year. And so, you got to find someone in the short term. But yeah, I think you got to trade for someone's catcher because major league, minor league, whatever, right? Because right now there is no one coming to help the Yankees at that position. There's no Austin Romine. There's no Kyle Higashioka. None of those guys are in the high minors right now. There's one guy named Austin Wells who maybe in 3 or 4 years will be an okay Kyle Schwarber temporary catcher.
So the Yankees, that's going to be a big thing. But I think we're in agreement that the Gary Sanchez era looks like it's coming to a close. EJ, one of these days we're going to talk more about catchers, and Ted Simmons just went in the Hall of Fame, and I'm itching to talk about how close of a career Thurman Munson had to him, and Jorge Posada,
who should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to stake my claim on that one.
All right, so Munson is better. We could talk about that, but we're running out of time. We only have about 30 seconds left. The Yankees have 11 games, 2 more with the Rangers, and then they take on their big American League East rivals, the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, the Rays. In a week, we're going to be back here, and it's going to be pretty clear, I hope, or not. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we have a couple last games, but it should be pretty clear whether the Yankees had a great week, a bad week, and whether they got themselves close to the wild card, into the wild card, or we're looking at a long, cold, lonely winter, which is what nobody wants. So, EJ, this has been great. Love talking baseball with you, and glad we're doing this Start Spreading the News podcast. This is great.
Thanks, Paul.
Have a great night.
You too.